Hello and welcome everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings be with you. This is Ihsan. And today I am joined by Teresa Lesher, who is the author of a book entitled Searching for God, Finding Love. Welcome, Teresa.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning, and I appreciate the accommodation. I know you're out there in the Gulf, so it's a big time difference. Why don't we get started maybe with just a brief introduction, and you can just give us a brief background about yourself and how you actually came to Islam, because you were one of the early, you came to Islam at a time where I think there was far less information available than there is now. In fact, pre-internet. So, yeah, so, maybe give us a bit of a background of what actually led you to Islam.
Okay, well, yeah, I think you're right. It's very different to become a Muslim before the internet and after the internet, because now there's so much information out there and at our fingertips. But in my days, there wasn't. I became a Muslim in 1981, so now it's 2024, so that's 43 years ago. And I learned about Islam when I was in college, and I was a freshman in college, actually. It was just my second semester. And I met a group of international students. I was part of the International Student Association. And one reason why that's interesting to me is because my mother is German. She was born and raised in Germany. So I sort of grew up between cultures. I grew up in the United States, but of course I did have a German influence. So the International Student Organization was interesting to me. And I met some students there, and among the students I met, there were some Muslims. And we were just friends, and we would often discuss culture and traditions and different ways of doing things. And that was very interesting, but eventually the conversation went around to religion. And actually, there was one person in the group who seemed very interested in Christianity. I was a Christian at the time. And I was going to church every Sunday, and I considered myself a devout Christian. So anyway, this Muslim student seemed very interested in learning more about Christianity, and he would ask a lot of questions. And so I found myself explaining my religion, trying to make sense of it to him. And it was very hard for him to understand. He would always say, that doesn't make sense to me. What do you mean by that? Or can you explain more? And the more I talked, the more flustered I got. And this happened over a period of 2 or 3 weeks. And I just, eventually I became so frustrated at not being able to explain my religion in a logical way that somebody could understand easily. And so I just sort of wanted to take the pressure off of me. And so one day I said, well, I don't know, what do you believe in? Just to turn the table a little bit. And he said, well, I'm a Muslim. And well, what does that mean? And so he explained what Islam means. And, it's very simple. It didn't take him 2 or 3 weeks to explain it. And I didn't have to ask a lot of follow-up questions. I just thought, well, that's really simple. That makes a lot of sense. And so, that was my introduction to Islam. It took me probably, I would say, at least a month before I finally embraced Islam. And it's not because I didn't recognize the truth. I did recognize the truth, but it was, at that time I had to make a decision, and the decision is the hard part. The truth is easy to see. I think everyone can see the truth very easily, but making the decision to become a Muslim, it took me a little time. So,
That's fascinating. And I'm curious, at this point or at this stage, had you read much of the Quran? What was that like for you?
no, I had not read any of it. My only information about Islam was coming from this student. So I had to take his word for it. But, in a way, it was good because he focused just on the basics. There's one God. He created all of us. We're going to return to him after our life on earth. We're going to be judged by him. And then our ultimate destination will depend on how well we do. And so that made total sense to me. But as a Christian, of course, I was hoping that because I believed in Jesus, I had sort of like a free ticket to paradise. I didn't have to do a lot of work. And so he said, no, it's not like that at all. In fact, you will be judged for everything you say, everything you do, you will be brought to question. And so, in my heart, I knew that that was right and that was fair. So, I kind of struggled with myself. I knew that I could just forget this whole thing and just turn away and live my life the way I wanted to. But that concept of accountability really stuck with me, and it kept nagging at me. It kept poking me. And I kept thinking, well, what if he's right? What if we will be judged for everything? What if there are no free tickets just because you believe? And so eventually I realized that I was going to have to make a change in my life and myself if I was going to, if I was going to have the best chance of getting into paradise. So I thought I could become a Muslim, and I could live my best life. And if he's right, then I have everything to gain. I gain a good life, and I gain paradise as well. If he's wrong and there is nothing after this life, then I still really haven't lost anything. I figured at least I've gained a good life. I've done my best. I've led a wholesome and a loving life, and I've done my best that I could. So I thought, I really have nothing to lose. I might as well go ahead. So at that point, I wasn't really sure if I was 100% convinced about the afterlife. But, I said, I have nothing to lose. And then after I became a Muslim, I got a hold of a Quran, which had to be sent from overseas at that point. So I got my Quran and I started reading that. And of course, since then, I've been reading a lot. And was it the right decision? Of course. I've never regretted it. And it was the best thing that happened to me in my life. And, I thank God every day for being Muslim. I think when you have had a period of your life when you have not been Muslim, you understand the blessing of Islam. And I'm sure that there are a lot of born Muslims who feel the same way, but I think that us reverts, we really understand the difference between being lost and being guided. And so I'm very grateful to be among the Muslims. Alhamdulillah.
I mean, alhamdulillah. I concur 100%. I mean, that's why I also emphasize this idea that even as Muslims, people who are born into Islam, I should say, or have grown up with Islam culturally, really at some point need to make a conscious choice and decision to enter into, or even to re-enter into Islam, so you can actually see it for what it is. That was my experience, right? And yeah, no, that's amazing. That's beautiful. So the story, even this idea you mentioned, is quite, I'd say it's quite wise and mature at a young age. It reminds me of the story of Imam Ali, Karramallahu wajhahu, who, of course, the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ and one of his great inheritors. One time, a group of, I guess, unbelievers approached him and were criticizing and saying, "You Muslims are wasting your life. You're wasting it all in worship and in prayer. And we're actually enjoying this life. We're actually living."
Right.
And then Imam Ali asked them, right? He said, what is the end of all of us? What is our end, right? And they said, well, we're all going to end up in the grave. And he said, will there be any difference between us then? And they said, no, we'll all be in the same situation at the end. We're all dead. We're all in the earth. And he said, so if our end is the same, we're all going to end up in the grave. That's the end of everybody. And we spent our lives worshiping God, and if His promise is true, if His promise is true, we have eternity to look forward to. What will you have to look forward to? You may have enjoyed the life, but at the end is the same. And I think that opened their minds, mashallah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, so what was your family's reaction, especially in the 80s? I mean, there was so little, I think, information about Islam. You're mentioning that even a Quran had to be imported for you to be able to read a translation of it, compared to now where it's literally a click away. What was your what was your family's reaction to you coming to Islam at that age?
I think they thought it was just a phase, that it was going to pass. I think they were embarrassed about the whole thing because, I started changing my lifestyle. I started changing my clothing. I really think they were embarrassed. They were embarrassed to be seen with me, but, they never criticized me outright. They always respected my decision. And, thank God, until now we have a very close relationship. Nobody in my family has become Muslim, but I do think that they respect Islam and they respect Muslims. And I have even heard them defending Muslims. So the relationship has always been okay. And I think it gets better with time. I think the really important part of showing the beauty of Islam is they they were around my children, because children are so honest and so
Hmm.
candid, and they were very good kids. And even when they were teenagers, they were very respectful, helpful, modest. And I think they could see a difference between my children and the average American
Hmm.
child. Not that there's anything wrong, but there is a difference.
Yeah.
The Muslim child is a little bit maybe more focused on certain qualities. So I think that really helped to improve their impression of Islam very
Mashallah.
much.
I mean, even said Isa, Jesus, alayhi salam, says, by their fruits you shall know them. Right? By the
Yeah,
fruits of something, by the fruits of a tree, you shall
right.
know the quality of that tree. So
That's right.
that's a very, for anybody, I think that's looking the results are really what matters.
Yeah,
Right? We can
true.
believe whatever we want, we can claim whatever we want, but the result is what's important.
Right.
So, having come to Islam and also looking at it again with the eyes of a revert, of somebody who is seeing it, with fresh perspective, what are some of the blessings that you've seen in Islam, and also what are some of the gifts that you can say that you have experienced?
Well, I think the greatest gift definitely is the Quran. Um, Having the words of God, having a message from God in your hands is such a blessing. And when I was a young Muslim, I was reading the English translation, and I read many different translations, and everyone is a little different. Each one has its strengths and weaknesses. So eventually I got a little bit frustrated with the different translations of the Quran, and I always wanted to know more, and I always wanted to know what the original words meant. And I always hoped that I could understand it in Arabic. So I did study enough Arabic to be able to read Quran and understand Quran. And I first started out is I just wanted to be able to get the gist of what they were saying during the prayers in the mosque, or when I turned on the radio and I could hear the Quran being recited. I just wanted to know the gist of what they were saying. And so I started out with that goal. And once I reached that, I would up it to, to be able to understand even more. So now, alhamdulillah, I'm able to read the Quran just from the Arabic script. And this has been, I can't explain how this has transformed my life. Helped me to deal with my problems, helped me to deal with my self-talk, helped me to deal with other people. It's just been exactly what it's supposed to be, a guidance for me and for mankind. So that has been the greatest blessing. Everything else pales in comparison to that. Um, I can't really think of anything else right
Yeah,
now.
no, that's more than enough. It's truly is an incomprehensible gift that we have a
Yes,
living revelation as it was revealed. I mean, it's a profound gift to humanity, as
yes,
well
it
as
is.
extensive information and knowledge about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, every
Exactly.
aspect of
Yeah,
his life, and he, of course, one can't really understand the Quran without knowing the Prophet. I mean, he is the
true.
living example of the Quran itself.
Exactly.
Let's jump ahead a little bit. You've recently now let me know, when did you actually, has your book been published yet, or is it available?
Yes, it was released in March
Okay,
of 2024. So yes, it is in the market now, and you can buy it in all the major bookstores.
wonderful. So very recently published. Searching for
Mhm.
God, Finding Love. What is the meaning behind that title?
Well, I think that I started writing the book. Actually, I didn't really intend it to be a book. I started writing a blog several years back, and I just wanted to share the beauty of Islam, the my interpretation of Islam, of course, based on my reading of Quran and my own experiences. Eventually, my writing started to change to sort of like a way of self-discovery and even of religious identity. So the book kind of evolved. It still did, and that was my main intention, was to show the beauty of Islam, the beauty of a Muslim lifestyle. And what it means to be a Muslim. So that's what the book is about. And I go through some of the factors that have made me who I am, shaped my identity, and also some of the influencers that I have accepted to shape my destiny. I talk a lot about how the Quran has guided me in different ways through like sorting through my own childhood traumas, through depression, and through like a lot of really happy occasions as well. So yeah, it's really about discovering religion, as discovering Islam, discovering God or Allah in my daily life, just on a very basic level, a very human level. It's not very philosophical, but it's just how Islam has touched my life and how I've interpreted that.
I mean, personally, I think that that's extremely valuable, these personal stories and these personal perspectives, for both Muslims and non-Muslims to better understand Islam. Because as somebody who came to it and consciously, and especially from a Western background, I think these types of stories are extremely important. So how did we connect in terms of how did you and I connect in terms of the online work that I do? Maybe if you can share a bit about that. And you also mentioned actually in your book the course in spiritual healing, which is a course that I had created a few years ago. Maybe just touch on what that was like for you.
Oh, well, yes, I did take your course in spiritual healing, and that was in the winter of 2020. And everybody knows 2020, what that means. That was the COVID year. And I think, myself, like many people around the world, it was a very difficult time that year. The COVID year was very difficult. Myself personally, I went through sort of an identity crisis during that time during the COVID months, and I had to do a lot of soul searching. I was forced to look in the mirror for a very long time, and there was no place to escape to. There were no distractions. So I just really went through a lot of soul searching, and it was difficult. A lot of my childhood experiences sort of surfaced at that time. I was having a lot of dreams. It was a weird time. I mean, I didn't get sick or anything like that, but it was a difficult time anyway, as it was for many people. So okay, now it's like the fall of 2020, and I'm just going through all these personal, sort of like a personal crisis in a way. And then I got an email from you, and I don't know where it came from or how I got on your mailing list, but there was this email. It said, join my online course in spiritual healing. And so I said, okay, I have to try this because I really need some relief. I was really not very well at that point in my life. So I joined your course, and I learned a lot from you about childhood trauma and how it kind of shapes us, and it provides opportunities for spiritual growth. And I learned a lot about the fitra, the positive psycho-spiritual state that we are born into, and that we try to maintain as we go through life and try to rediscover if we have to. But really, I think the best part of the course for me was the meditations and the breath work, because it helped me to still my soul, to feel more centered and to find some balance and to find some quiet and peace. So I went through the breathing and meditation techniques that you recommended, and that really helped me a lot. And the part, yeah, you want to ask something?
No, I'm just saying, Alhamdulillah,
Going?
I'm just happy to hear that.
Yeah, the part that really sort of broke me down and opened me up at the same time, broke me open, as they say, was when you were talking about breath, and you were talking about, I'll never forget it. I'm going to cry. You were saying, remember who you are. Remember who you are. And you connected that to Allah's breath, how Allah breathed into us, and that we are essentially a breath from Allah. And that was such a revelation to me. I think that I've always been a little bit hard on myself in many ways. So to feel that I have such purity at my core and at my source and such goodness, it was really important for me, and it really touched me in a very important way. And it was at this point that I was able to turn around and, I was on my way up now. I mean, I was down at the bottom for a while. And with that teaching, with that realization, with that revelation, I just, I was born again. I felt like I was born again. So that was a very important time for me. And so I did mention you in my book. And so when the book came out, I thought, well, I should tell Ihsan that he's mentioned in my book, and maybe he'll read and he'll understand what he did for me. And so here we are. So this is wonderful.
No, absolutely, and I appreciate it so much. This aspect of the faith and the religion, a lot of the focus of my work is on, emphasizing this internal meditative spiritual aspect of the faith, because I think it's so essential to our growth and to our development and to our healing as human beings, and our connection and our relationship with our Creator, and ultimately coming better to know ourselves and God, which is really the purpose for which we are here. Do you find that this idea or this topic is discussed enough in general within the Muslim community, or is it something that we really should be placing much more emphasis on?
I've lived in Kuwait now for about 41 years now. And, I've lived amongst Muslims from many different nations, many different cultural backgrounds, because Kuwait is very diverse. And the Muslim population is quite large, of course. I attend a lot of religious talks and courses, and of course, I interact with a lot of Muslim people from a lot of different backgrounds. But I think that the focus is usually, unfortunately, on how to be a Muslim, on what to do. And I think that this spiritual aspect is often lacking. But I think maybe that's normal. And I can see why that happens. Because honestly, I was the same. I spent most of my Muslim life thinking that, my relationship to God is mostly work. It's mostly sacrifice. It leads to depletion. I mean, unfortunately, to be honest, I think that's how I felt. But there comes a point when things start to change. And when you realize how loving Allah is, and this realization doesn't come until He reveals it to you, when you realize how loving and caring and supportive He has been all this time, you realize that He's the source of love, and He is the source of abundance and wellness. And so then, your outlook changes and your way of practicing changes. But for me to explain that to people is difficult, because they're still in the preliminary stage where I was before. I mean, not everybody, I'm just generalizing. But how can I tell them about love until they've experienced it? It's very hard. I can tell them how to do it. I can tell them there's more, but until the barrier has been moved for them, they just won't understand.
Yeah, subhanAllah. This was my realization as well, in my experience, in terms of love being the essence of the religion. And I remember very early on too, I was at university when I started really studying and practicing Islam. And in the beginning, I was studying on my own, and there was actually love there that was motivating me, almost this sense of, I finally found out like what we're supposed, like how to do what I was created to do. So there wasn't really any sense of compulsion. But then again, I kind of started associating a lot with people at the local Islamic center, and one group in particular. And there was a huge emphasis on this idea that, you have to earn. And I wanted to mention this. I'm glad we came back to this because of something you said earlier. But this idea that you have to earn salvation through your works, through your struggle and your sacrifice and your deeds and your prayers and your fasting and so on.
Right.
And it became so heavy. And before, I remember doing it because I just felt I'm praying because this is what I was made to do. There was no compulsion to it. It just felt natural. And then when the force or the compulsion or the weight of it came, it actually became more and more difficult, increasingly difficult. And I entered into a personal crisis of my own, of just almost depression, because I wanted to grow and learn and get closer to God, but I began to actually feel further and further away from Him. That was my direct experience based on just the environment I was in. And that's when I began to pray for guidance, and then I met a teacher, my primary sheikh and guide, who was really inheriting what I would describe as the original way of the Prophet. And when I met him, I saw, I just in his eyes, I could see love again. Through his words, through his smile, I could experience again the divine mercy of God. So it was almost like a living manifestation through a good example, a human being who's actually carrying the way of love.
Right.
And then everything I wanted to do or needed to do became easy. Love became the fuel for everything. It almost became effortless. Prayer,
Yes.
fasting, worship, it just like, and this is why I emphasize, I'm bringing this up because it's so important for people to realize, I believe, that when love exists in the heart, when you're connected to love, and this is why the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be on him, said, your belief will not be complete until you love me even more than you love yourselves, because love is the key. Love of the
Yes.
Messenger, love of the pious, is actually love for God. And that's how the love of God reaches us. And it's like rocket fuel for the journey then. You mentioned depletion. That's literally what I felt, continually depleted. And it's love that charges us. It's love that gives us the energy and the fuel. And without love, it's like trying to get your car to move, but there's no fuel in the tank. You have to push the car, and that's exhausting.
Right.
And that love really is the path. That's why I really like the title of your book, right? Searching for God and Finding Love, because this I would say is the essence of the religion and of the faith. I also want to mention that one of sometimes the criticisms that I hear from Christian apologetics is, oh well, Islam doesn't have love and mercy. It's only on your deeds. And I only mention it because that's so inaccurate. And the Prophet himself invalidates that idea, right? Because he worshipped and prayed more than anybody. I mean, they say he would pray until his feet were cracking and blistering and all night. And then somebody asked him, right? He was asked, Messenger of God, why are you worshiping so much? You're the messenger of God. You've been forgiven. You're blessed. You have the highest station in the heavens. And he said, first he said out of gratitude and out of love, really. And then in another statement, he says, even I am not guaranteed paradise except by God's mercy, except by God's love.
Right.
And then we're taught, right, Allah is the infinitely merciful, the infinite loving, the infinitely kind. And the fact that love, kindness, mercy, generosity, forgiveness, all of these qualities originate with God. If we experience them to any degree as human beings, it's not even a drop of Allah's mercy that He's put into our hearts. So imagine the mercy of God. It's incomprehensible. And I just mentioned that because I think maybe some people may not be aware of that, and especially if they're outside of Islam.
Yes. Well, one thing I found really interesting in my study of the Quran is that it never asks us to love each other. And I thought that's kind of strange because growing up Christian, I was taught that Jesus said, love one another. And seems like a good commandment. But if you think about it, it's very vague. What does it mean to love someone? Is love just an emotion? You just say, yeah, I love you, and that's it. But, Islam is very different. Islam, we are supposed to love each other, of course, obviously. But Islam is very clear in spelling out exactly what love is. And so it's very principle driven. To love someone is to treat him well. It's to feed the poor. It's to be kind to your parents. It's being kind to your relatives. It's never annoying your neighbors. And, the list, of course, we know from the Quranic teachings, and especially even from the prophetic narrations, the hadith, what it means to love. And so even though Allah didn't say directly, love one another, and maybe even the Prophet didn't really say many times, love one another, but he told us how to act. Yeah. And so I think that when you act in a way of love, then the feeling of love rises in you. It's exactly like when you have a newborn child, of course you love the child when he's born, but it's through your caring for him, and it's through the sacrifice, and it's through the sleepless nights and cleaning up the mess and everything that you go through for your child that the love gets deeper and deeper. And so that's when the emotion comes up. And so I think that, maybe we reach a tipping point in a way when we're good to people, or when we worship Allah, is that, at first it feels like work, it feels like sacrifice, it takes our energy, but then there's a tipping point and it starts to turn in our favor where, as you said, it becomes a source of energy for us when it's based on love. But I don't think that we should go into the subject of love just thinking that I can will to love someone. It's going to take some effort. It's not an emotion, it's an action. And the emotion that comes out of it is the gift that comes after the action. So it's a gift that's returned to you, I think, from your effort in proactively and practically loving people.
I'm so glad you mentioned this because, again, I try to point out that love is not just a feeling or a state that comes and goes, but it should be a verb. It should be something we do. Yes. And so I'm reminded of the statement of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in which he says, you're not a true believer. Your belief is not complete until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. So it doesn't say love your brother as you love yourself, but it says to love what you want for yourself, for your brother, what you want for yourself, meaning to do for others as you would do for yourself. Right. And that indeed does, right, when we act in ways that are I would say that are based in service. That is really where love begins to arise, both within your heart and within the hearts of others. And if we just wait for this feeling to come up, I mean, it's going to be rare, rather than acting in a way that engenders love, creates love. And I mention this again because this is so important in relationships. And why Islam is based in protocol and etiquette and what we call adab, manners and behavior. And if we behave in the right way, like you said, if children are behaving in a respectful way to their parents, to their grandparents, it increases love in the home. It increases love amongst the family and spouses to one another. That's what creates love. That's what nurtures love. That's what fuels and fans the flames of love.
Yes, yes, that's beautiful. Yes.
You have this quote in your book, and I want to read it. And going back to the identity, the topic of identity, I'm just going to read this really quickly. You mentioned, all this time I've been searching for God, and I found him as close to me as my breath. And then you go on, and so before and beyond all my labels, titles, positions, and duties, I remembered my source in God. His breath breathed into my tiny body, and eventually a breath my body will exhale as I make my return journey to my Maker. Now I'm sure of who I am. And now that I know myself, I know everyone. We're all essentially a breath from God. We are created by him, and we belong to him, and we are returning to him. In the meantime, I will do my best to honor the privilege of my existence and the implication of my origin. I will respect myself and strive to be whole and wholesome, loving and loved, tender and joyful. I will honor all living things, since they too house that divine breath. I will stay conscious of my source and my destination, and in between, during the sojourn on earth, I will do my best to stay true to my essence, to always be, first and foremost, a breath of God. I think that is so beautifully written, and
thank you.
Not just eloquent, but really, really profoundly meaningful, especially in a world in which we as human beings really are looking for ourselves. We're looking for who we truly are. And you have this idea quite often, I'm seeking myself. And this became quite popular in the last 20, 30 years, I suppose, as a personal development, New Age, idea. And yet, here, you're taking identity back to its source, to the source of who we are, where we come from. So the point is, how can we know who we are unless we know our Creator? Unless we seek to know our Creator. So the path of seeking, excuse me, the path of seeking God is actually the path of seeking our true selves, who we truly are, where we come from, what is the meaning and purpose of our existence, where are we going? This is why the scholars would often say in the early days of Islam, they who know themselves are as they who know their Lord, basically equating the path of guidance and growth and development and an ascent or approach to God as the same as actually coming into our true identity. What would you maybe comment or your reflections on that, Teresa?
Yes, I think that, throughout the book, I've looked at different aspects of my personality, and like I said, my titles, my positions, my duties. And I mean, the most obvious one is I'm a woman, and, I'm a teacher, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm a wife, but none of these titles really satisfies me. I always think I'm more than that. And I was trying to find out who that is. I really did not grasp who I am. And I was looking at all these parts of myself and trying to understand who I really am. Like I said, I was looking into the mirror and I didn't know who was looking back, and that really bothered me. And I couldn't look away. I had to find out. And so your course really helped me in that way, as realizing that I am a breath from God. So once you know your source, and you know who you really are, then none of these titles matter anymore. What matters is your attributes. And I think that, I was just talking with somebody a couple of days ago, and I think that probably the biggest question that we're going to be asked, it might not be what did you do, how much did you pray, how much did you give, but I think the real question is going to be, how well did you love? And this is the kind of question that I'm thinking about now. It's not about visiting that sick person, for example, but it's about showing love during that visit, being a loving person. Like you said, when you met that person, you could see the love in his eyes. You could see the care that was coming from him, from his soul. That touches people. And, I couldn't give $1 million to somebody, but if I don't have love in that gesture, it's really worthless. It's worthless to God. And I think, it might be worth something, but I think it has to be based in love. So knowing that I'm coming from a place of love from the Creator, who is the most loving, that gives me a lot of confidence that I can do this. And so now, like, I'm starting to think, okay, when I interact with somebody, am I loving this person, or am I loving Allah? I'm loving God, the Creator, and this person is only the courier between us. So I'm loving somebody. Let's say I'm going to make somebody a nice meal, and this is an expression of my love. But I have to put in my mind that this is not for the person. This is actually for Allah. I'm making this gesture. I'm doing this gesture, making this meal for Allah. But I have to deliver it to this person before it can go to Allah. So he becomes the courier between us. So I'm starting to think in this way, and it's changing the way I do things. I think I'm doing it with a lot more heart when I interact with people. I'm trying anyway. To be more loving, more pure, and I hope that people will react to that. Not just react to the deed, but react to the love behind it, which is really what helps people heal and find their way.
That's
when
profound.
Yeah,
that's beautiful, and again, healing comes from God. So when we act with love, that love becomes a bridge between creation and creator. Like, we become a conduit. Exactly. And so when human beings experience love and compassion and kindness and love from other human beings, it actually increases faith in human. It brings us back to faith. It reminds us of God. Also, that's such a profound way of looking at things. It reminds me again of a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ mentions that on the Day of Judgment, Allah will say to a person who worshipped and prayed and right, kept the commandments of the religion, but Allah will not be pleased with them. And He will say, I was sick and you didn't visit me. I was hungry and you didn't feed me. I was sad and you didn't console me. And the servant of God will say, how is that possible? Oh, our Lord, how can you be hungry and sick and sad? And He said, my servant was sick. My servant was hungry. My servant was sad. And you did not help them. You did not offer them comfort and so on. That's a profound way of looking at things, Teresa. We have a lot of roles. I was just having this conversation with a friend just yesterday, in fact. And as human beings, we have a lot of roles: mother, father, husband, wife, work, whatever work we happen to be doing, whatever our profession is, and so on. But the reality is none of these things can actually satisfy our souls because they're all temporal. They're all based in the temporal world. They're all based in the temporal world. And so we keep trying to define ourselves by the constraints of the world, the temporal, physical world. But none of it will ever tell us who we truly are, can define us. None of it can truly give us our identity. And it is this shift and this recognition, this realization that we are, in reality, and everything else comes after this. First and foremost, we are creatures and creations and servants of God. And this is an eternal identity. It doesn't end with this world. It connects us to it's what connects us to our source. And Allah says in the Qur'an, we have honored the children of Adam. وَلَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي Adam. We've honored the children of Adam. What can be a greater honor than to be connected to the Lord of heavens in this way? In this relationship that's really based in nobility, as my sheikh would often say. I'm going to jump to a slightly different topic for a moment because I can get your perspective on this because you have one. Okay. I grew up in the world before the internet, right? Okay. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I've seen how the world has changed significantly since then, and it continues to accelerate in change. But I remember, almost even the study of religion, the study of faith and spirituality in those early days, even though we had less information available and accessible to us, there was something else there was almost this sense of mystery and awe and wonder that existed within the world, and even in our pursuits of knowledge. And I don't find, even though we have access to so much information now, I don't find that we're necessarily learning more now of value, because there's also maybe so much distraction, and there's too much information available now. And this idea that God will guide us to what we need. So whatever's our sustenance, whether the internet exists or not, we're going to be guided to it regardless. Okay. So I'm just curious to hear your perspective on this, because another topic that I do talk a lot about is technology, the impact of it on our culture, on society, on our psychology, on our health, on our faith and spirituality as well. And I want to bring this up because we have now a generation of children who are now becoming adults who have grown up with the internet. This is all they know. Their whole life they've known a world in which the internet has existed. So I'm just curious to hear your perspective of life in the world and even the spiritual path before and after the internet. And again, there's pluses and minuses, pros and cons to all of this. And perhaps, just maybe if you can shed a bit of perspective on, we understand the value of the internet, but also the value of maybe unplugging from time to time.
Well, yeah, definitely. And like you said, there's a lot of information out there. And when you have a question, it's good to look, but it's also good sometimes not to look. And sometimes it's good just to be with yourself and be in a quiet place and listen to the answers that are already within you. Mm-hmm. And also, we don't need the internet to read the Qur'an. You could, of course, but I think to have a routine of reading it, at least to read it once in your lifetime is so important. And, the thing about unplugging, I think about the prophets, the great prophets. They all spent time in the desert. They were all shepherds. They were all like really unplugged, not obviously from the internet. They were unplugged, but they were also in a way removed from their own communities, from their cities and villages and whatever. And they would spend time out in the desert. And so the value in this is that in the desert, and now I live in the desert, so I know what it's like. There really are no distractions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's exactly like looking at the sea, but where the sea has waves and it has some movement and some life. The desert, it looks just flat and plain. It does not look alive. So anyway, my point is that there are no distractions. So what do you do in an environment where there's nothing to look at? There's only two places really to look for insight or to look for messages or to look for information, and that's upwards. So you look to your creator, and inwards. So you look at yourself. And so I think that oftentimes that's what's lacking in our lives, is that we have so much information and so much distraction around us that we don't give ourselves time to have no distractions, to have nowhere to look and nothing to see except to turn inward so we can access our own personal wisdom that is given to us, of course, from our creator. This is our fitra. And also just to look in Allah's book and to see what he is saying to us. I mean, if you just think of the miracle of having this message from our creator. I mean, if we had a message from an alien from another planet, it would get a lot of attention. And we have, I mean, if we had just one sentence from an alien from another planet, it would be all over the news. But we have something better than that. We have something from our creator, and it's not one sentence, it's not one page, it's 600 pages. So there's a lot of value in that if we can turn to it and give it some attention and really think about it and ponder, meditate on the meanings. This is where we're going to find knowledge. This is where we're going to find enlightenment. I don't know if we can get information from the internet, but true knowledge, enlightenment, I think that's going to come from, like I said, looking inwards and looking upwards. And of course, looking upwards now means reading the Quran.
Yeah, mashallah. Beautiful. I was in the desert earlier this year for Umrah, and we actually took a trek from Mecca to Medina to take the route of the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ. So almost 2 weeks out in the desert, and
Beautiful.
you begin to really see the power of the desert, because like you said, there's nothing there. It's just actually, when you're out in the deep desert, it's just stillness, pure stillness, silence, stillness, and emptiness. And it's such a powerful portal into the divine presence of God, into strengthening our connection with God's presence. Yes. And there's a divine wisdom and reason, like as you said, why all the great prophets retreated into the desert, right, into this space free from worldly distractions and veils. And regarding what you mentioned in terms of the source of knowledge and guidance being within us, I'm reminded of the verse of the Qur'an in Surah Rahman. Ar-Rahman a'lam al-Qur'an khalaq al-insan a'lam al-bayan, that the merciful, the most merciful, taught the Qur'an and then created insan, created the human being, and then taught him a'lam al-bayan, taught him speech. So prior to our creation in the physical world, the knowledge of truth was put into each soul. And this goes back to the idea that you mentioned earlier, the fitra. Right. And how every human being, if we can actually turn inward and just listen to the guidance within ourselves, it guides us to the truth, and truth can emerge from within. And then the Quran actually affirms that. It's actually an affirmation of what's already in our hearts. That's why I think people who are open and sincere, when they hear the Quran, when they read it, when they understand it, it echoes what we already know, as it should.
Right. Yeah, one thing that, on my journey of searching for God, and I've always known God, even as a child, I knew God, but I always wanted more. I was never satisfied with what I had. I'm still not. I always want more. But once you realize that Allah is love, and that He's always been there. He's always been watching out for you. Like your qadr is written. Um, you start to feel like, if Allah is always there, then why don't I feel that sometimes? If Allah's love is always available, how come sometimes I feel bad, or I feel disconnected? And so, like me now, I mean, I never really thought about this before, but now I'm starting to be sure that Allah is always there. He's always within my reach. He's always, in a way, within me, because He's that breath in me. And so if I'm not feeling connected to Allah, that's my fault. Um, Maybe I'm not open, or maybe I'm not quiet enough. Maybe I'm not receptive, or maybe sometimes I feel maybe I've done something wrong, and this has put like a barrier between us. So I'm always, once you experience Allah's love and you just get immersed in it, and you feel the joy, the elation, the ecstasy of this love, you want more of it. You want it all the time. And so you're always like trying to reach that experience again. And when you're not feeling it, like you're having a bad day, and you start wondering, how can I get it back? So sometimes, yeah, we do have to disconnect. We have to give ourselves the time to rediscover, not rediscover it, but to re-experience it. It's always there. And if we're not feeling it, it's on us, because I don't think that Allah withholds His love from anybody.
No.
If we're not feeling it, it's on us. So,
Yeah.
knowing that, I'm always in a constant state of almost like worry, like I don't want to lose this. I don't want to do anything that would come between me and Allah's love. So it's a different kind of work. Like before it was work, but it was more like doing, trying to do things. But now it's more of maybe not doing so much as much as it is being open and receiving. I want to receive that love.
Mashallah.
So yeah, it's a different way. I mean, as we go down the spiritual path, our focus changes a little bit. So it's a very interesting journey.
And it's so beautiful because it provides endless fuel for the journey. You're never complacent. You're always trying to see, how can I improve, and how can I evolve? How can I increase my connection to God? It never ends. As close as one can draw to Allah, there's infinitely more. It's so beautiful. And as you mentioned also in your book, in the Qur'an, Allah says, I am nearer to my servants than their jugular vein. So Allah is affirming He's always close to us, but then the distance is from our side.
Right.
And that's really where the fear comes in at one point in the journey. It's not so much, it's less, I would say, fear of, let's say, punishment or hellfire, and more fear of just distance from our source, distance from peace, right? Distance from light. These are the attributes of God.
Right.
Well, it's been a pleasure and a wonderful conversation, Teresa, and I want to thank you for joining us, and I'm looking forward to reading your memoir and your book. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to the conversation that maybe we didn't have a chance to get into?
Well, you mentioned that my book is a memoir, and that's true. It's a spiritual memoir, I would say. But I hope that it would inspire people to maybe think about their own memoirs, because once we start thinking of our stories, and we start analyzing our past, and we start articulating, our journey, I think this is when a lot of healing can take place. For me, I was able to have a lot of closure, and a lot of different events in my life, a lot of relationships that I really needed to look at. I needed to have some closure and to move on. And so I think that writing it was a way of healing. And healing is very important. Of course, we all want to be healed and whole and all of that. But, in the Quran, it says that that we should come to Allah, that eventually when we return to Allah, that we hope that our hearts would be salim. We want to have that qalban salim, which is a whole heart, a healed heart. And so how do we reach that? I mean, we really need to work on ourselves through our lives. And so, writing a memoir is sort of like journaling in a way. And if you can write a spiritual memoir, it's even better because you're linking everything to your spirituality or to, the creator or to your purpose in life. And so that's very helpful. And so I hope that in a way, I mean, my story is just my story. It's not extraordinary. I'm like an average person doing average things. But also my story is very special because it's mine. And everybody has a special story. Everybody's story is beautiful and unique. And when we go to Allah, we're going to give him our story because that's the only thing that will remain of us is, the things we thought about, the things we did, and the things we said. So my point is that if we can work on our story in this life, we can sort of write our story. We have an idea of what we're going to hand over to Allah when we get to him, when we reach him, is that we're going to hand him a story. But how nice it is to know what the story is instead of being surprised about all the things that you thought you forgot about. And then also what's really nice is that my story isn't finished yet. I wrote up to a certain point, but now I still have the rest of my story. So instead of just going with the flow and letting life happen to me, I'm starting to think, well, let me make a plan. And Allah's plan is the best, and who knows what will happen. But it is good to sort of visualize an end to your story and to start working on the chapters that haven't come yet. So anyway, my whole point is that writing a story, writing your life story, or thinking about it is important, not only to heal from the past, but to also have a vision for the future with the intention and the goal that this is the story, this is the book that I'm going to hand Allah in my hand over to him, along with my heart, my story and my heart. And I want those to be good. And so it's worth that exercise of working on your story. And through that, you work on your heart a lot. So I think that's the real benefit. Like I said, it's just, my story is my story, but everybody has a wonderful story. And I would love to hear everybody's story. I love hearing about, especially reverts and any Muslim, anybody in life, and their experience with God and their experience with spirituality. I think it's all beautiful.
As profound, a profound suggestion and insight. That's beautiful. Actually, it's given me something to think about. In many ways, we are perhaps co-writing our own stories, and our choices really are important. This helps us to become conscious seekers and conscious travelers. And Allah says in the Qur'an as well, and maybe this is a perfect place to end, where it all began, with the very revelation, Iqra. بسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم. Read in the name of your Lord, and it goes on, and that initial revelation ends with the pen. That through the pen Allah teaches human beings what they are not yet aware of. The power of the pen, mashallah. Beautiful, Sister Teresa. It's been a pleasure. It's been a joy to connect with you, and I'm absolutely certain that our audience and listeners will enjoy this conversation. So thank you for making time. Jazakallah khairan. May Allah reward you. The book is entitled Searching for God, Finding Love by Teresa Lesher. And it's available, I'm assuming people can order it, look it up anywhere online, Amazon, etc.
Yes.
I don't like to advertise for Amazon, but
yeah.
But
it's on Thrift Books and many other sources. Actually, I have a website. It's teresalesher.com. So some of the links for booksellers are there.
Perfect. Yeah. Excellent. So everybody, please feel free to connect with Teresa at her website. And everybody else, I pray that you enjoyed this conversation. And if you're seeing this on YouTube, please give it a like, give it a subscribe, or give us a subscribe and share with friends and family who you think may also benefit. And inshallah ta'ala, I look forward to connecting with you all again later. Thank you again, Teresa.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Be well. Fi aman Allah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.